to demonstrate you my appreciation of your work, you become witness of a linguistic one or two sentence experiment. Treubotan taye kakaye ihana pai ve ya olen iloinen voidesani valitai puolueni lempimatavese saxasta. I fear I have terribly butchered it now, and I just can pray that you rudimentarily could understand what I wanted to express with this sentence. Olen ishta iloinen voidesani jatka englan kielska puerta. Some studies claim that Finnish people are the happiest in the world. And the annual World Happiness Report, and if I'm informed correctly, for the second year in a row, ranked Finland as the most cheerful nation on earth. And to give you an impression how happy I am since this amazing welcome yesterday, take for granted, since yesterday I have topped you in that ranking. Many, many thanks for this invitation. Thinking about how to operate today's speech, I decided to resort to the famous German strategic thinker of the late 18th and early 19th century, Karl von Clausewitz, who recommends putting an analysis always first. Therefore, my first remarks are devoted to an evaluation which briefly identifies the defects of today's clown world, but also to the identification of these psyop manipulations of the ideologues behind it, whereby I wanted to make it clear that liberalism and freedom are not to be equated. It's only from this anamnesis that I would like to open up the perspective of recovery in contrast to the pathological zeitgeist and outline our mission in that process. And since I have learned that this conference is attended by a very educated audience, I feel free to deliver less a kind of a populist or poor populist campaign speech, but putting forward the one or the other thought, delving a little bit deeper under the surface. Please apologize for any occasional linguistic mistakes, as I usually give my speeches in my home country, therefore in German. Nevertheless, now in medias res. The working title of this conference presupposes an end to today's regimes which are perceived as liberalist, as well in their self-conception. And indeed, there is reason for that assumption. The current supranational liberalist regime ends up in disorder and chaos because it confuses unattached permissiveness or licentious dissoluteness with freedom. And in an irrational madness of tolerance promotes all the excesses that are harmful to society, while it simultaneously persecutes in an almost dictatorial repressive manner all cultural, well-proven practices capable creating identity in favor of naturally grown communities. That's why they will fail. The demographic inhomogenization and individualistic atomization of societies, which is raised and praised as a principle by liberalism, and simultaneous incitement by overbearing aspirations of every, even artificially identifiable minority, keyword LGBTQ, whose mental ability to cope with frictions is reduced to zero since bemoaning so-called microaggressions, those societies, after that before mentioned cultural Bolshevik attack of deconstruction, those societies result in highly fragile social structures which have no resilience at all against the regime immanent crisis potential of that particular ideology. Again, that's why they will fail. All critical discourse falls victim to synchronized asphyxiation. We witnessed that when trust the science has become synonymous with the infallibility of the prefects of the mainstream congregation of faith, whether it's about pandemic gospels or climate apocalypse. Official public life aiming for mentally destabilized masses degenerating into a noisy nihilism that produces nothing more than supposed victim groups to perform in an agitatorically affected frenzy of permanent quasi-religious rituals of reparation. On the one hand, the egalitarian distinctness autistic left shows allergic reactions as soon as its universalistic view of humanity is confronted with anthropological realities, but paradoxically reacts just as aggressively to demands for societal homogeneity that contradicts its perverted extreme of diversity, refusing to recognize that there can be no diversity without distinctness. And for a third, that's why they will fail. They will fail due to the character of their self-contradictory doctrine. The woke, sick, anti-social hallucinations based on the left-wing philosophies out of the garbage can will sooner or later collapse like a house of cards. It's therefore welcome that this conference has chosen to deal specifically with the issue of a post-liberalist political order. Let's keep in mind that liberalism is a label fraud, a bogus claim, as it has nothing in common with freedom, with the term liberalist being just diluted, in particular when occupied by the political left. Left illiberalism, to put it precisely, left illiberal totalitarianism employing institutional nepotism backstage and mob rule in public is a threat to a free society as an open dictatorship never would be capable of. As that Jacobin attitude of ideological virtue signaling meanwhile penetrates the educational system after already having entered the public media, the danger to freedom intensifies. There is often talk of deep state, of the deep state, whether with a view to Washington or its branch in Brussels. But for a better understanding, we can also speak of deep tech or deep pharma to make it clear to the electorate that we are not only dealing with corrupt parties of national traitors when it comes to the corporate vogue. That is important. That is important because it exposes the pluralism narrative of the powers that be as an illusion of democracy. And for as long as we fail to expose this predominant manipulative grotesque that still sells supervised thinking within a patronizing mindset totalitarian state to us as the supreme art of democracy, just due to every 4 or 5 years receiving a powerless share of power called electoral vote, mostly for the prefabricated political display. As long as we fail to expose that grotesque, as long those string pullers will succeed in selling any criticism of their strangulation of freedom as a threat to freedom, and what's more, allegedly done by us. We do not just have the duty to raise our voice to avoid becoming complicit as knowledgeers by staying silent. Above all, we are challenged to articulate in raising awareness, not to misinterpret as freedom anything that contributes to the decline of society by fostering selfish, non-binding characters and irresponsibility in utilizing the appeal to the lowest instincts, in other words, the conditioning of a yielding undemandingness towards oneself. That's not freedom. And as much as that's not freedom, does liberal democracy neither provide liberty nor democracy. It reduces participation to self-interest and provides mainly self-indulgence. Freedom is not an exclusively individualistic project, if only because man is by nature a social being. Completely isolated on a lonely island, you wouldn't hardly enjoy your freedom to the full, even though nobody would restrict your actions in the slightest. It is only that confusion of freedom with licentious dissoluteness and unattached permissiveness which makes it possible for the liberalist regimes to reinterpret our idealistic critique and even our demand for self-determination, which is just another description for freedom, as allegedly hostile to freedom. And that prevailing manipulation is to address. And it is up to us to make that discourse heard, because who else is to expect to do that? For I'm surely not revealing a secret when I say that the majority of our contemporaries talk too quietly about such crucial things. Too loudly about unnecessary, too much about others, too little which other, and above all, too often without thinking. Moreover, remind the repression-related scissors in the head, the self-censorship and anticipatory obedience of the not-so-brave ones. So it will be up to us to address that, or in other words, to administer that eye-opening red pill. The sooner those still dominant regimes collapse due to their internal contradictions, the better. However, what we should be clear about is the mere collapse of a regime does not automatically mean replacement by a better order. A lot has to be done between the twilight zone of failed state and the new beginning. To explain that metaphorically, there will be a need for beacons to guide then in the future disillusioned contemporaries, and for that beacon's radiance to illuminate in the sense of knowledge and convincing influence. That radiance has to fall like a seed on then at least somehow prepared fertile soil. What does that mean for us? What do I want to say with that metaphor? The beacon is to be understood as a non-governmental model of order, despite not yet governing, already existing, which is both a community of an alternative reality of a way of living and a think tank for ideas aimed to combine tradition and innovation in a practical way. The fertile soil in that metaphor is the seedbed made capable of absorbing new guiding cultural impulses. The beacons require ambitious activists who are willing to take over responsibility and show courage to implement creativity. The fertile soil as a prerequisite for such a political engagement to bear fruit requires a countercultural offer during the before-mentioned twilight zone to generate the receptivity or readiness of at least critical mass for particular changes, especially given the fact that no less than an axiomatic paradigm shift is necessary. One is more an inward work, while the other is an outward operation. building internally an own elite, and externally acting as influencers. The more accurate our political offers are in congruence with a realistic image of human beings and natural community needs, the more successful we will be able to convince, whether intellectual or intuitive is ultimately then indifferent. The representatives of the political beacons require a philosophical, ethical foundation, as well as, and I think that's very important, I want to pronounce this, as well as a mastery of political craftsmanship. Our thinkers must not retreat complacently into ivory towers of intellectual arrogance just because the Kali Yuga outside feels too disgusting. I'm sure you know the name Bismarck. Bismarck coined the saying, politics is the art of the possible, the attainable, the art of the next best. I deduce from that quotation that successful politics requires a balance of worldview and pragmatism. One could perhaps also speak of the interplay of strategy and tactics, but less theoretically. It's a question of not degenerating into a cloistered sect during times of repression, but of, on the contrary, radiating, connectable, joie de vivre, and becoming more attractive by then than today's establishment. For the sake of clarity to those to whom that sounds too less ideologically or too less militant, precisely because we are witnessing these days a policy devoid of any reference to reality, which is exclusively ideologically charged and totally immune to advice. Because of that, we must not run the risk of making the same mistake by accustoming ourselves to a kind of a bunker mentality in our mindset due to the current phase of repression. Not least because of that, and that's also a point I want to pronounce in particular, not least because of that, we have each, according to his or her personal predisposition, we have to connect also beyond the political circles as well with other societal circles, on the one hand, to get in touch with the best characters still to find out there, and further to continuously measure our positions regarding their suitability for everyday life. Moreover, that also avoids the risk of getting caught in a filter bubble. And now, after having touched the paradoxical absurdities of the left liberal Jacobin system and outlined what the national opposition regarding its activists should pay attention to in particular, I feel free to proceed to draft my political ideas for an ethno-identitarian Europe. Please do not be disappointed if my idea for Europe does not include feminist foreign policy, serial murdering farmer bitches, obese nutritionists, climate hysterical frequent flyers, Stone Age-like religious warriors, identity-distorted transgender, drug-addicted Black Lives Matter multi-criminals, mentally retarded woke warriors, or similar pathological zeitgeist phenomena. I think it's unbelievable what mental illnesses rear their ugly heads these days. However, it still remains true. Decline is no progress, and neither lies a foundation for future. And in the context of another Europe than the version of Brussels EU, allow me to quote now myself with a brief answer I gave on behalf of my party to the question of my motivation for standing as a candidate in this year's European elections. Europe needs a voice that speaks out against geostrategic confrontational imperialist hegemony in terms of security policy, against mass immigration demographically, against deindustrialization economically, against a debt-based transfer union in terms of fiscal policy, and against an anti-trad family LGBTQ XYZ transformation in societal policy. European cooperation, which I am expressly in favor of, is to organize, however, on flat rather than deep integration up to the micro level of still self-determined nation states, and essentially has to see itself as a complementary but not synchronized economic community, not an egalitarian political one. And if the Brussels sovereignty sponge proves to be unreformable in that respect, which I unfortunately strongly believe, then we have to break away from Brussels. It's a struggle, Occidental Europe versus European Union. If the European Union proves to be the dysfunctional order for maintaining Occidental culture and preserving Europe's indigenous ethnic composition, then it's our duty to discuss another political order. The fateful question of every political order is the selection of its elite, and by which mechanisms that is accomplished best partly corresponds with the particular mentality of a nation's people, which is why there needs not be only one suit that fits all countries. Moreover, this touches on a fundamental question of a nation-state's order, one that is from a nationalist perspective within the scope of the principle of non-interference in internal affairs of another state, which is why I do not go into detail in constitutional theories, but merely point out that it's not harmful to read the writings of Aristotle and Plato regarding the different types of rule. Anyone, by doing with this, who feels similarities with his government when reading in particular the section on ochlocracy, mob rule, at least knows then for sure that there's some need for action. By the way, this principle of non-interference is based on the acceptance of national self-determination, which is an essential distinguishing feature of my idea of Europe, contrary to Brussels' heteronomy. And the fact that the ill-fated EU Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen comes from Germany is extremely embarrassing to me. And I therefore always feel compelled to apologize for it when being abroad, to describe how embarrassing that woman is, especially for me as a German. I try to explain that by a comparison. When the Roman Emperor Caligula proclaimed a horse consul that was, at least according to my opinion, no less lunatic than making Ursula von der Leyen president of the EU Commission. And now, however, let's finally start talking about the character of a post-liberalist era for Occidental Europe. Occidental Europe, the nationalist dream destination that hopefully may become true as our magical place of longing. Anything but to rule out that the beginning of a post-left liberalist society will coincide with the end of Brussels EU. And historiography will perhaps one day highlight it as a particular irony of history that first liberalism had to be overcome to label disagreement no longer as a hate crime. Don't misunderstand me, libertinage, which ends in indecency, confusion, selfishness, of course, should end. But there has to be freedom. A political system led by people, due to their self-assurance, strong enough to aspire greatness without taking resort to exaggerated gestures. To be honest, in some cases, just to overplay being too soft for a true revolutionary. Such a post-liberalist order will be able to govern foremost by convincing, not banning and censoring. A future nationalism will not, like liberalism, build up on an atomistic social ontology and degrade society to an imaginary social contract in the mistaken belief that mere constitutional patriotism could curb the centrifugal forces of a random society caught up in the delusion of indefinite diversity. If you take the term identity regarding its Latin roots and etymological meaning, idem and ens, entis, that shows it does primarily not describe a characterization of a single individuum, but first and foremost a common ground of an in-group attitude. Aristotle defined the human being as the zoon politikon, by nature conditioned towards the municipal community. That mode of common being, as identity could be translated, requires a particular degree of homogeneity. Moreover, that common ground is expressed by a culture which doesn't fall as a monolithic block from the sky, but slowly develops and by tradition is passed forward within a distinct community over generations. Identity does not exist individually alone, nor can it be reduced in its collective dimension to the cultural era without attributing the significance of ethnicity. Ethnicity is the founder and bearer of culture. Ethnicity is even the pre-constitutional element which makes up and authorizes every legal framework called constitution. We have a generations-spanning responsibility to preserve the socio-cultural biotope in which, due to its specific evolution, our potential as an identity-capable community for future development can thrive best. By the way, ancestors settling in before undeveloped land and building a civilization are not at all comparable to modern-day immigrants invading already industrialized nations in order to sign up for welfare benefits. Liberalism, in its exaggerated individualism, neglects the demos. It is crucial, however, that acceptance of the results of a collective process of decision-making requires a certain degree of societal homogeneity. Therefore, you need not just a demos, but at best an ethnos. That's a crucial point to be aware of when fighting for the preservation of Occidental Europe. No question, crime issues, the housing crisis, the burden of welfare systems and so on. These are all important aspects. But it's about much more than just that. A post-liberalist era will focus on an identitarian leading culture that will give ethnicity its proper importance, which is why, as an essential task, an organized re-immigration will be implemented as a reversal of the Great Replacement. That has nothing whatsoever to do with any genocidal ethnic cleansing. Rather, it will be carried out in a far more orderly manner by the then well-managed state authorities than the previous asylum invasion on the ticket of greedy human traffickers in the backwash of fanatical NGOs. long-standing, hard-working and well-integrated representatives of kinship European peoples have no reason to let themselves get incited against us by the left, as they do not pose a threat to our European family of nations. On the contrary, they themselves will take advantage of the fact that we refuse to Africanize our continent and do not want to let Sharia law forced upon us on the flying carpet. Let's make clear, not are we the extremists for wanting normal conditions, but those who forcefully want to impose a so-called new normality on us, those are the true extremists who are to fight. In the context of demography, the promotion and care for the traditional family is of particular importance in a nationalist order. And family means to speak of father and mother, not parent one or parent two, and especially to recognize the mother's educational achievements. Maternal education should be recognized for pension purposes, and a mother should never ever be forced to work if she chooses to have another child. That is freedom of choice. That is freedom of choice, not what some feminists claim with regard to abortion. The latter is not about choice, it is about a child. By the way, for a nationalist order, the feminine is of huge relevance. However, not at all the feminist. Having outlined the main features of the most important aspect, which is demography, I will briefly turn to a few other areas in the light of a post-liberalist order. The economy has to serve, first of all, the necessary supply of needs, and then the appropriate generation of prosperity and its fair distribution. Economy is based on the interplay of the factors of production that are land, labor, and capital. And since the latter derives from the other two before-mentioned factors, therefore capital must never be deprived of its serving function either. Complemented by the prioritization of regional economic cycles, the degeneration into globalist financial feudalism, as we are witnessing today, is also to be avoided. It's as simple as that. Market economy within a regionalized and social framework. Yes. Capitalism as selfishness on steroids. No. It's as simple as that. In today's liberalist order, the economy is compelled to globalization, as a result of which international corporations have only business locations but lack a homeland. Nevertheless, they occupy oligopolistic positions of power. Here too, we must not allow ourselves to be confused. Nowadays, globalist, I call it free trade extremism, does not at all mean the exchange of goods in the sense of mutually complementary cooperation, but is rather institutionalized cutthroat competition with the aim of a specific economic system, which is financial feudalism for a minority of beneficiaries and precariat socialism for a majority of victims. A post-liberalist order will have to create framework conditions that focus on the regional diversity of small and medium-sized companies and avoid those becoming jeopardized by competition distorting political-induced market advantages of large corporations. Our political order will not allow supranational trusts to demand corporate identity from their toilers on the spot without in turn being an enterprise loyal to its workers' home country. When globalist hyperconnectivity has been created to uproot the national and the local, something wrong runs deep in our societies. Therefore, my advice, let's regionalize. Connectivity, no problem. But globalist strangulation, no thanks, we are happy to do without. And in terms of monetary policy, it is part of the self-conception of national self-determination not to relinquish control of its monetary and central bank policy. It goes without saying, assuming comparable strong economies, it is impossible to talk about certain interventions with regard to exchange rate bandwidths within the framework of a somehow interstate economic community. But in principle, it is difficult to have an independent economic policy if you are not also in control of your monetary policy. The introduction of the Esperanto money called euro, especially alongside the EU logic of expansionism and including the softening of the former stability criteria, was not only a mistake, but is further proof of the dysfunctionality of the day-to-day materialistic short-sightedness of liberalism. And one area of diligent care that is required is education. Some of today's youth are skipping school to get excited about the weather in 15 years' time, instead of worrying about a good education and professional perspectives. Instead of failed private lectures, we need education which creates a holistic personality that goes beyond mere intellectualism. I have a dream of a cultural climate of neither frivolous skepticism nor scholastic dogmatism, where moreover also aestheticism is an essential part of morality. That's my dream of culture and education. Despite striving to educate our youth to a commitment to best performance and fulfillment of duty, the indifference which makes great political issues seem secondary compared to industrial and elementary questions, that has come to an end. Therefore, I think fighting for the souls of the indigenous European people also includes a return to the dream depth of mythology. The German philosopher, author and theologian of the 19th century, David Friedrich Strauss, once concluded regarding strengthening the role of myths in spirituality that the crucial element is not epitomized by an affirmation of reality, but by the symbolic expression of a superior truth. Why do I quote this? Because that's refreshingly something completely different to today's postmodernist value relativism. We have to offer a deeper narrative versus the materialistic reduction of a holistic reality for the purpose to create an authority which is more based on a value system than on persons or political parties. And to use again a metaphor, the values are the vehicle in its quality. The politician is just the driver of that vehicle. It's about more than just superficial cosmetics that only cover up subjacent misguiding positions of switches. It's not just about the wine, new wine in old wineskins. It's not just about better administrating political mischiefs. Our claim to shape the future is much more profound and far-reaching. We don't just have a political program, we have a vision. We are aware. From lofty words to a new order is a long road of 1,000 difficulties and maybe as well of contradictions. The path to a new era is anything but a sprint. It's rather a marathon, possibly even over several generations. Further, because we are fighting against the quagmire of a deep state structures where career politicians and ideologically motivated perpetrators have made themselves comfortable, we will at times be confronted with enormous repression. However, in the deepest suffering, keep even the confidence to make even things possible which at a certain point seemed impossible. At least we can already today organize, and we have heard it, our own alternative environments within our families and political, cultural communities to use them as a source of strength and bliss. Moreover, the crucial thing is the more political narratives move away from reality, from the truth, the more obvious become the lies of establishment's propaganda. That's why, because of their gaslighting goes all in, more and more people get red-pilled. The more corporate vogue and the power desires of overzealous globalist governments are at war with ethnic realities, the less controversial become our opinions. Indeed, they are already shared by millions of people up and down Europe. Precisely due to that, free speech is increasingly under attack. Nevertheless, we are not allowed to remain silent, even when facing disadvantages. Remind, as long as the revolutionary tipping point is not reached, unfortunately, as long as the so-called silent majority moves as little as a grain without whose arm does not turn. And coming to the end, the Athenian statesman Pericles said, "The secret of happiness is freedom, and the secret of freedom is courage." Therefore, our freedom and our courage must not end where still the fear of so many begins. Awake instead of vogue. We have to be prepared to meet the moment, which means rethinking politics, clear regarding the line of defense as well as the point of attack. It's about ethnicity and demography, and freedom of man must count for more than the freedom of capital. We have set out to end the policy of permanent sovereignty and freedom-averse self-castration of nation-states. We want our countries back, and we will take them back. That conference today is one more evidence that this reconquista has already started. Thank you for your attention. It's an honor being here with you.